Imagine a scenario where the U.S., come November, is in complete disarray. No one knows who the president is. There's lawsuits going on. It's November. It's a week after the election, and everyone's like, we don't know. Several states are giving press conferences where the state legislature is saying, these are not our results. We did not certify these. We have the constitutional authority over the elections, and these are not the real certified results. The governor says, well, I say they are. And so everyone's just like shrugging. Well, who's giving the orders then? Who's giving the orders to the other bases? And then you get something light where they just say, look, we've got the UN Secretary General, of course, who has worked with the United States, is going to, in the interim, have someone and give us a general view of like how we can stay organized. And that's the first step in. If the U.S. does dissolve into a greater conflict, then the people who are already stationed overseas just get told, don't worry, chain of command isn't broken. Here's your new boss.
Yeah, some UN or NATO commander, et cetera, who is in charge. The only reason why I don't think the divorce is possible or even the civil war is possible is because I go back to 2020 when General Milley said that he had private conversations with China to let them know that he would let them have fair warning if Trump were actually to do anything. And you say, well, wait a second, why would you go against the commander in chief? And you realize, the military is a little different than the commander in chief. So I think the military complex is so strong and so powerful that if there was the inkling of a civil war, those on the other side would be
there is no other
killed.
Side. This is movie versions of civil wars.
Yeah.
It
would be over before it started.
No, in almost every civil war in the world ever, it is bubbling up factions who randomly assert control for some reason. And it's an avalanche. There's no scenario, or I should say it's extremely unlikely in any circumstance where you get the states breaking apart and then declaring that they're joining a union. That's just what happens with the United States in 1861 is a group of states that were basically focused around key issues and geographically connected, but also politically aligned. And so when actually there was one small piece of in the South, I can't remember, was it Louisiana or something, that stayed union. They were like resisting.
Oh, look.
Yeah, something like that. We looked it up before when we were looking up the Abraham Lincoln's election in 1864. A lot of people seem to think that civil war is going to be California going, we declare civil war. What's going to happen is 30 guys from Eastern California are going to just basically take over and say, we don't abide by any of this anymore. National divorce doesn't happen when Donald Trump raises an army on the East Coast to the California West Coast. Like, none of that will happen. What is more likely to happen is Texas files a lawsuit to the Supreme Court again in November saying, we have seen now numerous instances over the past two elections where they are subverting the Constitution and violating the legislative authority over elections. The Supreme Court once again says, we will not intervene. Texas then says, then we've got a problem because we will not recognize this man as president after everything that's already happened over the past 4 years. Then you get, it's remarkable. In 2020, we had, I think, 48 states were involved in a lawsuit suing Pennsylvania because they violated the state legislature's process of the elections. And so this was Texas v. Pennsylvania, and the Supreme Court refused to hear it. Basically, we have been in 4 years of limbo where, as much as people don't want to admit it in the mainstream, you have high-level state actors. I'm talking like AGs, governors, senators, who do not believe Biden actually won. Now, I know the media talks election deniers. Oh, please. Every single one of these Democrats that calls a Republican election denier is an election denier themselves. So we know exactly where this is going. If this time around, considering what we're seeing with the southern border, the actions of the Texas National Guard versus the feds, if there is another, whatever you want to call it, shadow campaign that results in states filing lawsuits against each other, and the Supreme Court once again refuses to intervene, it's not that Texas is going to call up Arizona and say, you with us, boys? Because we're going to go, hoorah. What's going to happen is Texas is going to say we're deploying our National Guard to the border, and we no longer regard the federal agents as having authority here. Federal agents then say, no, we're taking command from Joe Biden. But then you've got federal agents who live in Texas being told by the Texas government, that's not the president. Trump is actually the president. You take orders from him. And they live there. And so it's going to be really interesting when federal agents who are in places like Texas are being told, look, when we cooperate with law enforcement, it's Trump's federal agents, not Biden's. and then things start getting weird. So if civil war does happen or national divorce, it's going to be confusing, chaotic, and no one knows exactly what's going on. You're going to have roving bands of militia. There's going to be groups that are going to be appointed. It could even come to the point where Donald Trump shows up, gets inaugurated, and then Democrats claim that Trump never actually won and he broke his way into the White House. No idea. Matt Taibbi described it as a moment where two vehicles speed to the local police station in D.C. Two men jump out of each car, run up to the chief of police and say, arrest that man at each other. So we don't know where it goes. But ultimately, my point is the body that controls the U.S. military is not beholden to the American people in any way and hasn't been for a long time. The Congress doesn't care about what you think. It's show legislation. We know that members of Congress don't even show up to vote. They have the camera set up in such a way. We were talking about this the other day, where you can see the one guy standing there going, how is it that Joe Biden is blah, 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 blah. In the wide shot, you can't see it. There's no one in the room.
No.
It's fake. It's all for show. So in the event of an actual national divorce, my concern is that the military-industrial complex machine of the United States just becomes an international machine outside of whatever the U.S. is.
Or a BRICS machine, which would be even more terrifying if they just changed their alignment, where they're getting their fiat from the other side. I don't know, but I agree that it is kind of its own autonomous organization.
What you're describing sounds like the beginning of the War of the Roses, where you had two kings from two different houses who were both claiming legitimacy of the throne, and then all their families and allies and intrigues and because no one knew who was the king. All I knew is that I was just trying to live on my farm, and the next thing you know, one shows up and says you must pledge allegiance to this king, and if you don't, we'll kill your kids, and so you do. But then the next day, the other one shows up and says you must pledge allegiance, and you just want to be left the hell alone. So, chaos.
The risk I see is election happens, and then in one of these states, maybe a swing state, they have multiple results. And then they're like, we don't have to tell you. So then no one crosses 270. Biden and Trump are both short of the threshold, so it goes to a contingent election where you end up with the House, House delegations would then choose the president. The Senate would then choose the vice president. Once that happens, Democrat media across the country is going to say Biden won and Trump's cheating. Trump's allies in these states are cheating to try and get him the victory. He's not really the president. Then the question becomes, if Biden and Trump both show up for the inauguration, what happens? Who's the authority? Who determines? Or if it comes down to whatever the date is going to be January 6th again, for the counting of the Electoral College votes, if they're like, we don't have any. These states never submitted. They're under contest in the courts.
When it comes to who's the authority, the most basic reality is whoever authored the people's minds first. Who got to the media first? It's like when they run to the courthouse and they're like, arrest him. That's who's gonna run the media story first. And I got an idea who I think is gonna do that. It's gonna be whoever owns those companies, ABC, CBS, CNN, NBC, all these companies that are kind of owned by the empire or run kind of in cahoots with the empire. They're probably gonna make people believe that the imperial president is the one that got elected. That's my guess. And then
there is still the issue of Joe Biden making it that far. And so another potential scenario of who is the president is if Joe Biden fizzles out right at the last minute.
Like pardons Hunter and then resigns.
And no, I mean like Trump wins by default because a month out, Joe Biden is just incapacitated. No one's aware of his current state. Kamala Harris is not going to step in because Joe Biden is cognizant but incapable. So you basically have him in this limbo state where he is in the basement, not really running. Everyone knows that he's become, incapacitated. Then if it's a month out, Democrats are like, what do we do? Do we remove Joe Biden now? We can't remove him from the ballot, but he cannot be president. What do you do? How would that work? If everyone in the country knows Joe Biden is now completely incapacitated, medically and not coming back, his name's already on the ballot. There's no time to put Kamala on the ballot. And if he wins, what does that mean? This would be a constitutional crisis because it's one thing to have a president who gets elected and then you find out his brain doesn't work and you trigger the 25th Amendment. It's another thing to intentionally vote for a man who you know is already incapable, and the moment he gets elected, invoke the 25th Amendment.
Well, if you saw video footage of him last night at Juneteenth event at the White House, Americans know that he is not there. I mean, just his body language, the general look of utter confusion on his face. The poor guy, they have him standing up and trying to have him dance to whatever
He's the completely
music
still.
was,
and you see his hands frozen and
he's
floating?
just standing there. Well, look at the clip you just played. The slurring of the language. I mean, he doesn't know. He doesn't know what's going on.
And didn't we just see a poll that said this is the number one concern?
Number one issue. Imagine a scenario where it is a known fact, a month out, October surprise, Joe Biden suffers stroke, incapacitated. And the Democrats come on TV and say, vote for him anyway. This is going to be a disaster.
It would be Kamala then, but what would happen if...
No, it wouldn't. They can't just put her name on the ballot.
So they would run Joe, but it would just be Kamala, basically?
It would be Biden, Harris, or Biden, and the expectation is you're actually voting for Kamala Harris. But think about what would happen in red states and swing states when they're saying, no way are we going to accept having the president be incapacitated and without the possibility of recovery, and you running him so that you could appoint whoever you want after the fact.
I think a lot of Democratic states wouldn't go for that either.
Yeah, they would.
Pure insanity.
They'd say that Joe Biden is still alive. We have a 25th Amendment for a reason. He's on the ballot. Vote for him. But the point is, voting for an incapacitated Joe Biden is just so that Kamala Harris can either step down, Gavin Newsom can step in, and then they basically appoint a president.
The big thing that I think is interesting from what you're saying is that basically the Democratic Party has always tried to downplay Joe Biden's health. He's had two previous strokes, right? One in the 80s and one, I think, in the early 2000s. Like, it's not that he was in tip-top shape when they decided this is the guy we have to run for president. But his health reports never seem to mention this, right? He has a previous history of having a neurological issue or a neurological condition. I'm not a doctor. I cannot tell you what the long-term implications are there. But it's hard for me not to believe that if you've had a stroke before, there's no damage, right? And I think that speaks to the reality, which is that they don't trust the rest of the bench. They don't think there's anyone who could really satisfactorily fill the spot that Joe Biden is sort of filling right now, at least filling physically, maybe not filling in terms of leadership and personality, which strikes as sort of a doom and gloom mentality within the DNC. It doesn't seem like they believe they are able to put the next person in office, whether it's Gavin Newsom, whether it's Kamala Harris, whether it's AOC. Like, they don't, as a sort of structure, seem to believe in who's coming down the pipe.
No, I agree with you. I think that, well, they've become such a cult of personality party, and they do lionize their leaders and create little altars to them, that Biden was the only one in 2019 who had a general favorability and who was not super polarizing. The Pete Buttigieg people are not going to vote for the Elizabeth Warren people. The Elizabeth Warren people hate the Bernie Sanders people, even though they're the same. The Bernie Sanders people don't want to talk. Then Michael Bloomberg jumped in the race, right? So Joe Biden was like, hey, look, he was vice president. Everyone kind of likes him. We can pull the strings on him pretty easily because really he just wants to, like the Queen, walk around and shake hands and wave and give a couple speeches, and we'll do all the hard work. And all the guy ever wanted to do was be president. So I agree with you, but I don't think their bench is very deep. They keep pointing to Gavin. Gavin's leaving the state with $100 billion deficit and the highest unemployment rate in the nation. I mean, he was mayor of San Francisco. He destroyed San Francisco. He's governor of California. He's destroyed California. And the guy keeps getting promoted. That's the amazing thing. He keeps getting higher office.
I always wonder if Gavin Newsom, I assume when he runs for president in 2028, if he doesn't get put in before, if he could win California, because I feel like California would back him anyways. On the other hand, I don't think Californians are happy with the performance there.
No, Californians are leaving. Mm-hmm. The ones who are coming in are illegals. And that's the only reason why the population of California is staying somewhat stable. But most Californians or not most Californians, the majority of people leaving California are Californians.
But wouldn't that mean the people that are leaving are the ones that don't want to be under his leadership? So the people who are still there are probably more ardent supporters of him?
Probably. They just sent there by the buses. They get on a bus and they're told, you're going to San Diego. Okay, San Diego.
Well, thank you for letting me know.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't seem good. I mean, I would argue it is something that eventually the America First and MAGA contingent of Republican and conservative causes will also have to deal with eventually. They would need to say, who is going to take over leadership after Trump can no longer serve in office. It seems like they have more options than the Democrats do.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.